Star Trek, Primitive Passenger, Season 2, Episode 4, Sterling's Hunt. Admiral Jellicoe's face filled the view screen, his expression stern and unyielding. Captain Sterling did the closest thing he could to standing at attention while sitting at his desk on Earth Station. "Captain Sterling, your mission is clear," Jellicoe began, his voice crisp. "You're to venture beyond Federation space, past Betazoid, on a diplomatic mission. Your primary objective is to engage with local factions and begin building alliances to counteract Cardassian expansion and aggression in the region." Sterling nodded. But Jellicoe wasn't finished. The Admiral's eyes narrowed, his tone becoming sharper. "Let me be absolutely clear, Captain. This is not a mission to chase your personal vendetta against Nolan Mercer. I'm aware of your history with him, but Starfleet cannot and will not condone any unauthorized pursuits." Jellicoe paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "That being said, Mercer's knowledge of the region and his experience with the Cardassians could be valuable. If the opportunity arises to bring him closer, to potentially utilize his expertise, do so. But remember, Captain, this is about diplomacy and strategy, not personal grudges. Am I understood?" Sterling's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady as he replied, "Perfectly, Admiral. We'll depart immediately." As the transmission ended, Sterling's eyes lingered on the darkened screen, his mind already racing with plans that walked a fine line between his orders and his own ambitions. As the turbolift carried Sterling to the Intrepid's docking bay, he mentally rehearsed the speech he'd give his crew. Jellicoe's words echoed in his mind, but Sterling had his own agenda, one that would finally bring Mercer to justice. Captain Sterling strode onto the bridge of the USS Intrepid, his posture rigid with barely contained energy. The crew snapped to attention as he took his seat in the command chair. "Helm, set course for Betazoid, maximum warp," Sterling ordered, his voice clipped. "Let's not waste any time." As the starship broke orbit and streaked away from Earth, Sterling's mind raced with plans that had little to do with his official orders. On the second day of their journey, he called his senior staff to the conference room. Latent, Angela Sachs sat attentively among her fellow officers as Sterling paced at the head of the table. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that made some of the crew shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm sure you're all wondering about the true nature of our mission," Sterling began, his voice low and determined. "While our official mandate is to engage in diplomacy, make no mistake, our primary objective is Nolan Mercer." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Sterling continued, his words laced with venom, "We're going to bring Mercer to his knees. Every meeting with local dignitaries, every handshake and agreement will be aimed at weakening his position in this sector." He leaned forward, his hands gripping the back of a chair. "I want you to look for any opportunity to damage his business operations, cut off his supply lines, turn his allies against him, do whatever it takes. Remember, anything that weakens Mercer drives him into our loving arms." Sterling's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Make no mistake, Mercer is our prey. We'll use every tool at our disposal to hunt him down and bring him in. Is that understood?" The crew murmured their assent, some more enthusiastically than others. Latent Sachs's face remained impassive, but her mind whirled with the implications of the captain's words. As the meeting adjourned and the officers filed out, the Intrepid continued its journey toward Betazoid, carrying with it a mission far different from the one Starfleet Command had intended. The stars streaked by outside, oblivious to the web of intrigue and ambition that was about to entangle them all. As the Intrepid approached Betazoid, Sterling prepared to welcome their new assets aboard. Little did he know, the young Betazoid would soon become a pawn in a game far beyond her understanding. Captain John Sterling's office seemed to shrink around Nalira Kethren as the man's steely gaze bore into her. His voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the tension. The goal is to get to the truth with Nolan Mercer, find out what he's hiding, who he really is, and, ultimately, how to access his tech. Nalira felt a twinge of discomfort, her empathic senses recoiling from the captain's barely concealed aggression. "It doesn't really work that way, Captain," she explained, her voice steady despite her unease. "I can only feel what Mercer is feeling internally. I can tell you when he's lying, when he's being truthful, if he's being deceptive or evasive." Sterling's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing at his temple. "Look, we've arranged for you to attend this meeting tonight, specifically for you to get close to him. It's a chance to get in close enough with Mercer to read his thoughts, to finally learn his weaknesses." The young Betazoid felt a chill run down her spine. "Exactly how close do you expect me to get with Mercer?" she asked, unable to keep a note of accusation from her voice. "I don't want you to do anything dangerous, but as close as you dare," Sterling replied, his tone brooking no argument. Nalira's mind raced, torn between her duty to her people and the moral quandary before her. The weight of Betazed's potential Federation membership pressed heavily on her shoulders, even as her conscience rebelled against Sterling's demands. Captain Sterling thrust a small stack of documents into Nalira's hands, his movements brusque and impatient. "Your government provided these. ID, background information, everything you need to blend in at the meeting." Nalira's fingers trembled slightly as she leafed through the papers, her dark eyes widening. "Captain, are you certain this is wise? The level of deception involved." "This was your government's idea," Sterling cut her off, his voice sharp. "This is why you're here. Betazoid wants to prove its worth to the Federation, and this is how they've chosen to do it." The young Betazoid swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. Hours later, she found herself in a room filled with a diverse array of beings. Cardassians, Zalaxians, Bajorans, and more. The air was thick with tension and competing agendas. The bustling conference room was a far cry from the serene gardens of Betazoid. Nalira took a deep breath, centering herself as she scanned the crowd for her target. Across the room, Mercer stood in quiet conversation, unaware of the psychic storm about to break upon him. Later, as the Cardassian representative droned on about the encroaching threat of Starfleet, Nalira's gaze was drawn inexorably to Nolan Mercer. He sat quietly, seemingly attentive, but something about his demeanor nagged at her empathic senses. Nolan sat quietly, his face a mask of calm as the meeting blathered further from the point. To anyone observing, he appeared the picture of attentiveness, but the young Betazoid in the corner knew better. A constant stream of decidedly unprofessional thoughts bombarded her mind. She couldn't help but to get caught up in Mercer's energy. Flashes of soft skin, full lips, and far more intimate scenarios played out in rapid succession. Centuries of experiences, both real and imagined, paraded through Nolan's mind with startling clarity. As the meeting concluded, Nalira approached Nolan, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "You're a pretender, Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice low. Nolan's eyebrow quirked. "Ah, you got me. Nalira Kethren of Betazoid." He leaned over awkwardly to read her name tag. "I've been pretending to be confident and in control all this time, but I really just want to have a good cry." His face fell into his hands, and in jest he peeked out between his fingers to see if she was watching. Laughing along, Nalira replied, "You almost had me convinced." Her smile reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. "Oh no, what gave it away? Was it because I was actually falling asleep during the meeting, so I had to think of whatever I could to stay awake?" Nolan shook his head, still playing. "It was that, wasn't it?" "Well, it's much simpler than all that." She paused for effect, thoroughly enjoying their little joust. But when the Cardassian delegate started his tirade about territorial rights, Nolan's casual demeanor faltered for a split second. "What do you—" "Come on, Mercer," she interrupted, her smile widening. "That speech was your kryptonite, I believe they said in your time and place." She was both showing off the ridiculous amount of homework she had done for this mission and pointing out to Nolan that he didn't belong here. Nolan recovered quickly, his trademark smirk returning. So now you know my secret. I have a lifelong aversion to long-winded political posturing. I'd wager most of the people in that room feel the same way." He paused, adding, "And kudos on a reference that would have been old's even when I was alive." The Betazoid's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what are you now, Mercer, if not alive?" "You're the mind reader, kid. You tell me," Nolan said, his eyes taking on a distant, ancient look. He opened himself to her, dropping the mental barriers he'd maintained for centuries. The Betazoid held his gaze for just a moment, her eyes widening as she drew a long breath. She quickly pulled away, her face pale, her composure shattered. Whatever she saw in that brief connection, it pierced through her, nearly breaking her sanity. The weight of the burden of choices made and unmade, the vastness of experiences both wondrous and horrific, it all crashed into her consciousness like a tidal wave. From that moment on, she couldn't or wouldn't read Nolan anymore. The trauma of that brief glimpse into the mind of a man who carried so much, who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, who had loved and lost more times than she could count, was too much to bear. Nolan watched her retreat, a mixture of regret and resignation in his eyes. He had shown her the truth she sought, but in doing so, he had inadvertently inflicted a wound that might never fully heal. As she disappeared around a corner, Nolan muttered to himself, "Sometimes, kid, it's better not to know." He turned and walked away, the weight of his years once again hidden behind his carefully constructed facade. Nalira stumbled onto the USS Intrepid, her usually graceful movements now uncoordinated and jerky. Her dark eyes, once sharp and observant, were unfocused and brimming with tears. As she made her way to Captain Sterling's ready room, crew members exchanged concerned glances, sensing the young Betazoid's distress. Sterling's face hardened as Nalira entered, her composure crumbling before him. "Report, Ms. Catherine," he demanded, his voice clipped. Nalira opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked sob escaped. She tried again, her words coming out in a jumbled rush. "I did what you asked. I got close to him. We were just talking, and he... She broke down, her body racked with uncontrollable sobs. Sterling's jaw clenched, frustration evident in every line of his face. "What happened? What did Mercer do to you?" he pressed, struggling to keep his voice even. But Nalira couldn't respond coherently. She sank to her knees, her hands clutching her head as if in pain. "Too much, too old, too deep," she muttered between sobs, her words making little sense to the captain. Realizing he wouldn't get a useful report, Sterling called for medical assistance. As the ship's doctor examined Nalira, confusion etched across his features. "I'm not entirely sure what we're dealing with here, Captain," the doctor admitted, frowning at his tricorder readings. "Her neural patterns are significantly altered from her baseline scans. It's as if her synapses are firing in completely new configurations." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "Meaning what, exactly?" The doctor shook his head. "I'm not sure. We still know so little about Betazoid physiology. Whatever happened during her encounter with Mercer, it's affected her on a fundamental level. I've never seen anything like it." As Nalira was led to sick bay, still weeping and muttering incoherently, Sterling retreated to his ready room. His fist slammed against his desk, anger boiling over. His carefully laid plan had not only failed, but had seemingly broken their Betazoid asset. Hours passed as Sterling waited for news from sickbay. The doctor's reports were inconclusive, each update more baffling than the last. As he stared out at the stars, Sterling realized his carefully laid plans were unraveling faster than he could reweave them. Later, after conferring with his senior staff, Sterling made his decision. "Prepare a shuttle," he ordered his first officer. "Have 2 officers escort Miss Catherine back to Betazoid. We can't afford to have her in this state, not with the delicate negotiations ahead on Bajor." As the orders were carried out, Sterling stood at his viewport, watching the stars streak by. His reflection stared back at him, determination etched in every line. Mercer had outmaneuvered him again, but Sterling's resolve only hardened. Whatever game Mercer was playing, whatever he'd done to Nalira, Sterling vowed he would uncover the truth. The shuttle departed, carrying the broken Betazoid back to her homeworld, while the Intrepid continued on its course to Bajor. Sterling's hunt for Mercer had suffered a setback, but it was far from over. As Nalira's sobs faded into the distance of space, the echoes of her encounter with Mercer lingered, a chilling reminder of the depths they had yet to plumb in this interstellar game of cat and mouse. The Intrepid's journey to Bajor was marked by a tense silence, the crew acutely aware of their captain's simmering frustration. As they approached the planet, Sterling immersed himself in preparing for their first diplomatic meeting. He pored over reports on Bajoran politics, Cardassian influence in the sector, and any whisper of Mercer's activities. Despite the setback with Nalira, Sterling was determined to turn this mission to his advantage. He would play the role of Federation diplomat, all the while laying groundwork for his true objective. As Bajor's distinctive orange sphere filled the view screen, Sterling straightened his uniform, a predatory glint in his eye. The hunt for Mercer would continue, with or without Betazoid assistance. Captain Sterling stood at the center of the bridge, his weathered face etched with lines of experience and determination. The starfield outside the view screen shifted as the ship maneuvered into its assigned parking slip above Bajor. Sterling's sharp eyes scanned the bridge crew, each at their station, when suddenly a blinding flash of white light erupted just off their starboard bow, washing over the bridge in an instant. "Report," Sterling barked, his body tensing as he whirled toward the science station. Lieutenant Angela Sachs, her blonde ponytail whipping as she turned to her console, fingers flying over the controls. Her striking blue eyes widened as she processed the readings. "Sir, we've detected an enormous energy surge. It's unlike anything I've ever seen." Sterling strode to her station, leaning in to examine the readouts. "Source?" "Unknown, sir," Sachs replied, frustration evident in her voice. "The surge originated from what appeared to be a small vessel, but it's gone." "On." Sterling's voice was low. "Dangerous." "Explain, Lieutenant." Sachs swallowed hard, meeting her captain's intense gaze. One moment it was there, the next, nothing. No warp signature, no impulse trail. It's as if it simply ceased to exist. Sterling's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he straightened. "Mercer," he growled, more to himself than the crew. "Sir?" Sachs questioned, her brow furrowed. "It has to be," Sterling said, pacing now. "That damned blink drive of his. Right under our noses." He slammed a fist onto the nearest console, causing several crew members to flinch. "Captain," Sachs ventured, "how is it possible we didn't detect his ship?" "Our sensors should have." "Should have, Lieutenant, but didn't," Sterling cut her off, his voice sharp with frustration. He took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. "This is precisely why we need to bring him in. That kind of technology, in the hands of someone like Mercer." He let the implications hang in the air, the bridge crew exchanging uneasy glances. "Sir," the tactical officer spoke up, "should we inform Bajoran authorities?" "Perhaps they can." "No," Sterling said firmly. "This stays on the bridge for now. The last thing we need is to create a panic or tip our hand." He turned back to Sachs. "Lieutenant, I want every scrap of data we collected on that energy surge analyzed. If there's a way to track it, to predict where it might reappear, I want to know." "Aye, sir," Sachs nodded, her determination matching her captain's. Sterling moved back to the center of the bridge, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the space where Mercer's ship had vanished. "He's out there, thinking he's untouchable. But mark my words, we'll find him. And when we do—" He left the threat unspoken, but every officer on the bridge felt its weight. The captain's gaze swept over his crew, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the bridge. "This is now our top priority. I don't care what strings we have to pull, what favors we have to call in. Nolan Mercer will not slip through our fingers again. Sterling and his top officers headed out for their away mission on Bajor. Lieutenant Angela Sachs slipped into her quarters, the door whooshing shut behind her. She leaned against it for a moment, closing her eyes and exhaling deeply. The day's events, Sterling's obsession, pressed down on her. With slow, deliberate steps, she crossed to her bed and sank onto its edge. Her hand reached out, almost of its own accord, to the nightstand drawer. From within, she withdrew a small metal box, its surface cool and smooth against her fingers. Angela opened it, revealing the comm badge Nolan Mercer had pressed into her palm nearly 5 years ago. The memory of his touch lingered, a phantom sensation that made her skin tingle. She lifted the badge, its weight familiar yet somehow charged with new significance. Sterling's words echoed in her mind, his determination to capture Mercer, to claim the Blink Drive as a trophy. The captain's ambition was palpable, his desire for advancement clear. Mercer's technology was the key to Sterling's ascension to admiralty, a path paved with accolades and legend. But as Angela cradled the comm badge, she found herself questioning the narrative she'd been fed. Nolan's face slammed before her eyes, not the hardened criminal Sterling painted him to be, but the man who had shown her kindness, whose gaze had held something more than mere charm. She ran her thumb over the badge's smooth surface, remembering the intensity in Nolan's eyes when he'd given it to her. "If you ever need to contact me," he'd said, his voice low and urgent. At the time, she'd dismissed it as the ploy of a cunning fugitive. Now, she wasn't so sure. "What are you really up to, Nolan?" she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the quiet of her quarters. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications she wasn't quite ready to face. Angela brought the badge to her lips, not quite kissing it, but feeling its cool metal against her skin. Her heart raced, torn between duty and a growing seed of doubt. The urge to activate it, to hear Nolan's voice again, was almost overwhelming. Instead, she carefully returned the badge to its box, but left it on her nightstand rather than hiding it away again. As she lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, Angela couldn't help but wonder what game Nolan Mercer was playing. She was beginning to suspect it was far more complex, and perhaps more noble, than Captain Sterling could imagine. With a soft sigh, she closed her eyes, the comm badge, a silent promise of possibilities yet unexplored. "Be careful out there, Nolan," she murmured, allowing herself, just for a moment, to hope that wherever he was safe. Epilogue. It had been a long day. Nolan sat motionless, staring out into the void of space as he often did instead of sleeping. The endless black, speckled with stars, had a way of quieting his mind, though it never lasted for long. Ilara's voice interrupted softly, almost a whisper. "Nolan?" He blinked, slowly pulling his gaze away from the stars. "Yeah?" His voice was gravelly, worn from hours of silence. "I just received a transmission." "It took a minute to pinpoint its origin," she continued, her tone cautious, almost hesitant. The concerned voice of Lieutenant Angela Sachs broke through the air, filling the expanse of the bridge. "Be careful out there, Nolan," said so quietly it barely existed. He stood abruptly, glancing around the room as if expecting to see her standing there. His broad shoulders stiffened, a posture that gave away his confusion, a lumbering, stunned presence like any gorilla, uncertain of its surroundings. Ilara's voice, calm yet empathetic, continued from the ether. "She didn't send it, actually. She didn't send it intentionally." She spoke, then tapped the badge. The low-power resonator transmitted the message via low-res band. Nolan's expression shifted to his signature, get on with it face. Widening eyes and a clenched jaw conveying more than words ever could. Ilara, aware of his impatience, added quickly, "The signal was incredibly weak, Nolan. She sent it 3 days ago, about 10 minutes after you blinked away from the Intrepid. It seems Lieutenant Sachs was, thinking about you." For a moment, the steel in his eyes softened. A complicated mix of emotions flickered across his face. Surprise, amusement, and something else. Something deeper. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture slow and deliberate, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, a small smile tugging at the edges of his mouth, though it never quite formed. Ilara's voice echoed softly, still present in the space around him. "Should I prepare a response?" she asked, her tone gentle yet professional. Nolan shook his head, the faint smile already fading. No response. But keep an ear out, will you? Just in case." "Of course, Nolan," Ilara replied, her tone carrying a note of understanding that no AI should have been able to muster. He sank back into his chair, the cold metal creaking under his weight, and let his gaze drift back to the endless stars outside. But now something had changed. There was a glimmer of warmth in his eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. In the vast, cold emptiness of space, a tiny ember of connection had flared to life, reminding him that even in the lonely game of cosmic chess, there was still room for the unpredictable.